Hey guys, I'm the former film student and welcome back to another video. In case following movie news and what's going on in the Hollywood sphere isn't really your thing, I'll catch you up a little bit to speed. Just a little over 2 months ago, Denis Villeneuve, whose name I've been pronouncing wrong for years apparently, released Dune Part 2, the sequel to Dune Part 1 released back in 2021. Now, even before Dune Part 1, or even really knowing what Dune was, I was really excited, mainly because Denis Villeneuve, in my opinion, was the best director of the 2010s, or at least one of them. I've been a massive fan of this guy ever since I rented Prisoners from my local video store back in 2013. At that time in my cinematic education journey, the film had a profound effect upon me. It was raw, exhilarating, emotionally taxing, and most of all, incredibly well made. This effect continued with Denis' indie psychological thriller Enemy, which is still one of my favorite films to show people to this day, simply because it's easily one of, if not the most experimental film Denis has made. His following film, Sicario, is a masterclass in tension, and seeing Arrival for me is a top 5 theater experience. I remember when the credits rolled as the Max Richter phenomenal score played, and my friend and I just stood up in silence, shocked and mesmerized by the experience Denis had just given us. He then continued that streak with 2017's Blade Runner 2049, a sequel to one of the most beloved and talked about science fiction films of all time, and, in my opinion, surpassed it. Everything I loved about the original was present in Denis' sequel, but I found myself more invested in the overall story and characters. While I still love the original, Blade Runner 2049 is still to me the best looking film ever made. Seriously, every single frame in this film could be used as the screensaver for your laptop or be used as the background of your phone. Eye candy galore. That being said, when it was announced that Villeneuve's film following his impressive Blade Runner sequel would be adapting the incredibly popular and infamously impossible to adapt sci-fi epic Dune, written by Frank Herbert and published in 1965. Needless to say, my attention was not only caught, but my interest more than piqued. And if you've been following this channel, one of my recent videos was focused around how I felt Dune Part 2 is a modern masterpiece of science fiction filmmaking, the type of film to be discussed years from now in the way we discussed 2001: A Space Odyssey, Alien, or even the original Blade Runner. Dune Part 2 does everything I feel a sci-fi epic should: interesting themes and subtext to chew on after the film credits roll, beautiful and stunning imagery that is burned into your brain after a single viewing, and characters that, despite living in a fictional world centuries in the future, still feel human and are ones that you can connect and relate to. After loving Dune Part 1 back in 2021 and Dune Part 2 starting out as my favorite film I've seen this decade, I became a little obsessed. I decided to satisfy that obsession by delving into the Dune novels. I spent the last month reading the first novel and falling absolutely in love with it. The differences and similarities between the film and book were fascinating and brought me a greater appreciation for both Denis' adaptation and Herbert's obvious talent as an author and creator of the source material, and then was able to read the much shorter sequel novel, Dune Messiah, in simply 3 days. And now we've arrived at the point of this video and the reason why people probably saw the title and disliked it immediately before hearing what I have to say, which is fine. I'll take the engagement. That being said, before I explain myself, I need to make this point clear. I really enjoyed Dune Messiah. I wouldn't have read the book in 3 days had I not enjoyed it as much. But the reason I titled the video Why You'll Hate Dune Messiah is for 2 main reasons. The first is easy: clickbait. The second is the real meat and potatoes. So back when Dune Part 1 was released, it was pretty well liked amongst general audience members and critics alike, boasting an 83% critic rating and 90% audience rating with an average score of 7.7 out of 10. Side note for anyone who wants to yell at me for bringing up Rotten Tomatoes, no, I do not use Rotten Tomatoes to inform my opinion. I just think since it's an aggregate site that compiles professional critics from different sources and publications, and also includes a score compiled of general audience members' reviews, that it does the best job at giving a broad view of the general consensus of a film. So I don't side with the audience or critics, I just acknowledge everyone wants something different from film, and that's okay. I only reference Rotten Tomatoes, again, because it gives a broad overview of what a lot of people from a lot of different walks of life and different metrics for a film feel about a specific movie. That being said, generally Dune Part 1 was well received, but the largest complaint from its detractors and those who did not enjoy it was that it lacked action and was too boring. Which, listen, I loved it, but I get that critique. It's definitely a slower paced film, especially for a sci-fi blockbuster, especially when you compare it to other franchises like Star Wars, a franchise that definitely borrowed a lot from Frank Herbert's Dune series, but Star Wars focuses more on the very definitive good versus evil. The Force and the Jedi are almost treated like religion, whereas Frank Herbert's Dune books are very critical of religion, and the lines between good and evil are a lot more blurred. And here's where we arrive at Dune Messiah. Now, as mentioned, I read Dune Messiah in about 3 days. I did so because I believed, despite being greenlit, that it would be a minimum of about 5 years before the next Dune film, and I'm an incredibly impatient person. Aside from that, Dune Messiah is about 300 pages shorter than the first Dune book, which needed 2 films to tell the entire story, and even then some of the elements are left out. Characters like Thufir Hawat, the Mentat advisor to Duke Leto Atreides, have a much larger role in the books. A whole chapter is even designated to the final moments of Liet Kynes, the planetologist of Arrakis, where the film boils that down to a 1 to 2 minute scene. But here's where the title of the video comes into play. I wanted to clarify a couple of things. First, I loved the Dune Messiah novel. It's excellently written, and Herbert tells such a unique and different story. Dune Messiah, unlike the first Dune, is much less of a sprawling sci-fi adventure of a young teenager blessed and cursed with a multitude of gifts, and simultaneously the pressures and burdens that come with said gifts, and losing everything, assimilating into a new culture of people and being recognized as this foretold messiah of these people, and then leading a rebellion against those who wronged him and his family. It's filled with political thriller aspects, but still has a fair share of classic sci-fi adventure. Dune Messiah nearly strips away all of the action and adventure present in the first novel and doubles down on the political thriller side of things. But more importantly, and this is why I think the film will be way more divisive than the first, Dune Messiah is a masterclass in regret and existentialism. Without spoiling much of the plot or events that unfold, Dune Messiah spends most of its short page count focusing on Paul Atreides 12 years after defeating the Harkonnens and usurping the throne of Emperor Shaddam IV, who played a pivotal role in the death of his father and the takedown of the Atreides house. The novel focuses on Paul heavily, and a lot of times focusing on his internal conflict and struggle, being cursed with prescience, or as seen in the film, as his ability to see throughout space and time. As mentioned in almost any sci-fi film that deals with time travel, time to Paul Atreides is not a linear line, but a never-ending circle. His gift or curse of visions, being able to see the future but only in bits and pieces and never whole or clear images. His prescience and abilities combined with melange or spice, the resource native to Arrakis, and the reason behind it being such a highly coveted planet, make Paul into a sort of oracle. A lot of what Paul struggles with in the first Dune novel is the future he sees that will lead to billions dead left behind in a haze of blood, all centered around his conquest. The Atreides flag in most visions being waved amongst the bloodshed. As Dune Messiah picks up 12 years after the events of the first film, this is after Paul has essentially completed his journey and leaving billions of lives and thousands of planets in his wake. Dune Messiah again focusing heavily on Paul coming to terms with what he's done, who he is, and how history will remember him. At one point in the novel, directly comparing himself to Adolf Hitler and Genghis Khan. Everyone around Paul seemingly dispelling what he's done, however, Paul knows what he's done, and despite their best efforts, he realizes he will be seen as a monster the likes of which may never be repeated in history. Denis Villeneuve, in his own words, wants to make Dune Messiah because the book is so different than the previous. And I think that element alone will lead to the film being more divisive than either Dune Part 1 or Part 2. As to its core, it's less of a sci-fi story and more of a character drama centered around regret and our place in space and time, all through the eyes of essentially the most despicable and murderous figure in history. Sure, there's political intrigue most present in Dune Part 1, but in reality, this is a smaller scale story, more focused on meditation on one's own actions and how they feel the universe and history will view them. On top of that, fan favorite characters like Lady Jessica, Paul's mother, and Gurney Halleck are not present in the book. Now, of course, Denis will most likely change elements, as he did with his 2 film adaptations, but the fact remains explains that on a fundamental level, a lot of what general audiences loved about Dune Part 1, and more so Part 2, will probably not be present in the film. Again, I must reiterate, I do not think Dune Messiah will be negatively reviewed or actually hated by most, if any, as Denis is an unbelievably talented filmmaker. But why Frank wrote the book the way he did, and why Denis wants to specifically make this film and it be his last Dune film, points towards a story that Dune film fans aren't expecting and maybe aren't ready for. It's a more mature and methodical story with less plot twists and adventures, and more so an intimate story about a man coming to terms with his place in the grand scheme of life. Personally, I can't wait for the film, as I have become a Dune fanatic and I'm currently making my way through the third novel in the series, Children of Dune, as well as loving Denis as a director. The video wasn't made to put people off to Dune Messiah, but more of a cautionary tale of not going in expecting the same thing twice, as that's also a reason that Denis Villeneuve only wanted to make 3 Dune films. As when the film finally does release, a lot of people will be surprised by the story we're given. Well, that is it for today, guys. As always, if you liked the video, make sure to click the like button, subscribe if you want to hear more from me, and click the little bell notification button so you get notified when I post new content.